Hello, and welcome to my video essay. My essay talks about the jets used throughout the Cold War, so 1947 to 1991. Let's go into the video now.
Legalize nuclear bombs.
First jet on the list, the P-80 Shooting Star, or the F-80 Shooting Star, under the United States Air Force, and was developed by Lockheed Corporation and the first ever fighter jet for the United States, unlike the P-59 Bell and also the British jet, the Gloucester Meteor. To counter Me-262s and Me-163s fighter jets and rocket planes. But one small issue, the P-80 was too late in World War II, so it didn't even see combat in the war. And during the Korean War, it was finally used for the fighter role, but the problem was that the North Korean MiG-15s was kicking the F-80's ass by outturning the jet, climb rate, and acceleration speed. So the Air Force needs a new fast jet, and they developed the F-86, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, so during the first test flight of the F-80 Shooting Star, in January 8th, 1944, the first pilot, Milo Bircham, reported the flight going well, but the engines on the F-80 had issues. Since jet tech was new at the time, the engine had reliability issues like short engine life, fuel system issues, and high engine temperature. And because of that, it killed two pilots during testing. One was Milo, and the other was a World War II ace, Richard Bond. But then a couple of years later, on June 19th, 1947, when production began on the F-80C variants, and in 1948, the dedicated United States Air Force renamed it to the F-80C, and the U.S. Navy did mess around with these jets, but they were only using them as trainers. So then, finally, to the Korean War, it saw combat for the first time, and this was first jet-to-jet action. But by this point, the Air Force was using the C variants, and they flew air-to-air and air-to-ground attacks while having multiple victories against North Korean Yak-9s and IL-10s. But they were piston engines, so they were not jets. Because the F-80 had an advantage, the Soviet MiGs was a different story. Both of the jets sure, but the MiGs, two words, swept wings. The MiGs were straight up faster than the F-80 and didn't know. And also I didn't know about the size because the United States and USSR saying the MiGs for the kill, but the United States are denying it. Either you stop lying, Jesus Christ. Time later, the F-80 was replaced by the F-86 Sabres, and the F-80s only did ground attacks. So that was the end of the F-80 Shooting Star. So let's move on to the F-86 Sabres. Now we are at the F-86, so we're going to get into the history and combat role for the F-86. So during concept art and thoughts of the F-86, they had ideas from the Me-262 jets, but for the research for the F-86 wings was kind of confusing, so my bad on that part. Anyways, the F-86 was developed by North American Aviation, and the wings relied on the Germans' um, World War II research designs from the Me-262, and the first prototype was built, the XP-86. In the first test flight of the F-86, piloted by George Welch and flew at Muroc Air Force Base. The flight went well from George. The jet had docile handling characteristics like good handling, and swept wings solved the speed issue. And a bonus on the wings, they installed a leading edge slats for close turning. More lift, it will automatically open at 290 knots for turning at high speeds. The slats will automatically close when at high speeds, reducing drag. But in practice, the slats were kind of slowing the jet, so even if the slats were closed. So it was kind of a trade-off. But for the slats were removed on the F variants, but we're getting to that later. Anyway, so the Army Air Force ordered 33 F-86A variants on November 20th, 1946. And buying the jet was $400,000 per jet, but the Air Force got it surprisingly cheaper for $100,000 per jet. And switching from the engine from the XPD-86 from the J35 to the new General Electric J47 engine. This got the speed to up to 670 knots, and climb rate doubled. The Air Force put 650 cals in front of the gun, the M3 Browning machine guns, Each gun mag carried 300 bullets of 50 cal. And then on February 15th, 1949, the 94th Fighter Interceptor Squadron at March Air Force Base in California, and their job was to name the new fighter like the Supercharger, but during contest, the Sabre won for the F-86. January 19th, 19 January 1950, five fighter groups got their hands on the Sabres. More upgrades were locked into the jets, like the radar gun, but radar was good at the time, but was never flawless. So below 6,000 feet of altitude, the radar got confused because of ground clutter. So if it failed, there's no backup gun sight. You just have to shoot blind. Climbing in the cockpit was easy, and inside the jet was comfortable in the American manner. From the cockpit, the view was great, and getting up in the air was balanced even under flight weather conditions. And then to the F variants, we're on the last variant on the F-86 F variants. So by this point, the North Korea was a worry to the U.S. The Soviet Union was an enemy to the U.S., and US and NATO allies thought they would relax their guard, but no, they need to rearm fast. Many of the F variants were sent to Korea to replace losses and upgrade squadrons to the new latest jet variants. So that's crazy. During this time, the some of the squadrons still have P-51 Mustangs. Crazy. Anyway, so this is a jet that removed the slats off the wings because it kind of increased drag. For some of the F variants like the F-86 F2, it lacked the guns. It lacked firepower on the gun. So the 50 cal did some damage, sure, but sometimes the MiG was a slippery target and took down almost their whole entire magazine just to down one MiG-15. So they replaced the gun machines to the 20mm cannons. They upgraded to the T-160 cannon, but the issue was it was slightly bigger than the M3 Browning, so they had to do some remodifications of the F-86 F variants. The interior of the air intake and also to extract gun gas, but it was hazardous in practice. North American fixed the issues of the Sabres. In December 1952, 8 F-86 were shipped to Japan on United States aircraft carrier, the USS Windham. And then combat missions began in the first week of January 1953, and there was problems with altitude. Jesus Christ, I don't want to get into that. But anyways, on the first missions, pilot John engaged a MiG-15 at 4,600 feet of altitude with a long burst fire with the T-60 or the T-160 engines. That killed the engine, but they restarted it at 2,000 feet and went to base with no issues besides that. 1 week later, Captain Murray Winslow fired a long burst as well, and it killed the engine, but Winslow couldn't get it to restart. So he punched out the Sabre, crashing it into the Yellow Sea. So North American aviation welded the door intake shut because the gun gas made the engine to stall, and the low oxygen at 45,000 feet. A gun switch was also fitted into the cockpit, so if you want to fire 2 cannons or 4 cannons, well, guess what? It didn't work, so Jesus. Alright, so to wrap things up with the F-86, the F-86 went on 282 missions, 41 engagements with the MiGs, but some MiGs got shot down, and none of our Sabres were shot down. But 2 Sabres were hit with cannon damage, but the F-86 did the job, and some of them went for up to display. And geez, I'm finally done with the F-86. Hey, post-production, sorry that I did not get all of the jets in the Korean War, but we'll be moving on to the Vietnam War in a second.
Good morning, Vietnam! Feeling with
Hey guys, just a heads up. So when making this video essay, I have to cut out some details and history of the Jets because it's getting to the end of the school year and I need to get this done now. So enjoy the rest of the video. And then here we go with the F4 Phantom, my favorite Vietnam fighter. But we're going to be talking about three variants right here: the F4E, the F4J, and the F4S models. Starting with the F4E, the F4E was developed for the United States Air Force during the Vietnam War. Earlier, the U.S. Air Force Phantoms like the F4C and F4D relied mostly on missiles and did not have an internal cannon. In Vietnam, pilots discovered missiles could fail or miss in close range dogfights. So to fix this problem, McDonnell Douglas created the F4E with a built-in gun. First flight in June 30th, 1967. In the first test flight went successful for the meeting of the goals for the United States, completely beating the F3H in performance because originally it was designed to beat the F3H because it was an underpowered jet. Anyways, the F4E had a great upgrades like a better radar and new targeting system, and the new addition, the M61 Vulcan 20mm cannon, and leading edge slats. This is the same slats that was from the F-86 Sabres. And then the engines, the two General Electric J79 turbojet engines, and could exceed to Mach 2. During the Vietnam War service, it was served as air superiority ground attack, escort missions, and close air support. And the famous weapons on the Phantom was the AIM-7 Sparrow, AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles, bombs and rockets, and AGM-65 Maverick missiles added later on. And then the cannon made the F4 much better in close range. Then to later service after the Vietnam War, the F4E served worldwide to Europe during the Cold War, Middle East, and NATO operations. And it was exported to Israel, Turkey, Greece, South Korea, Iran before the Iranian Revolution in 1979, and Egypt, Germany, and Japan, but it was a license-built version. And Israel did use this Phantom heavily from 1969 to the 80s to support the war, to support the Kuplan War or the Yom Kippur War, and the Israeli Phantoms were nicknamed the Kurnos, which meant sledgehammer in their language. Israel upgraded them with new avionics, better weapons, and precision strike capability. And after that, the United States Air Force retired the Phantom in the 1990s, but some countries still use these Phantoms today. The only country I know is Iran that still heavily use them and still use them right now. Now to the F4J Phantom II. This Phantom was an upgrade to the Navy and Marine Corps Phantom, like the F4E, and it first flew in May 27th, 1966. The first test flight went badly. The jet crashed, and caused by a severe control issue, a maintenance socket was reportedly left in the cockpit and causing the controls to jam immediately after takeoff. But it was a single Phantom, so it didn't kill the whole program. And the pilots on the F4 ejected safely, so they continued with the Phantom. But also the Navy wanted this to have better radar, improved missiles, better dogfighting ability, and more reliable electronics. And this is the jet that has the newest radar at the time, the AWG-10 radar. Had a new feature to ignore ground clutter. This is a big step for future radars. So basically ignore ground radars, and they name it pulse Doppler. The F4 designs for the aircraft for aircraft carriers to have strong landing gear, tailhook, and catapult launch capability. In the Vietnam War, it was a role for fleet defense, MiG interception, escort missions, and ground attack. The F4J scored heavily victories against North Vietnamese MiGs. After early missiles problems, the Navy improved pilot training with Top Gun School, founded in 1969. The Top Gun Academy taught air combat maneuvering, missile tactics, and dogfighting techniques, and this improved kill ratios. The U.S. Marines also had F4Js too for air support, air defense, and Marine F4Js operated them from both carriers and land bases. And that's it for the F4 Phantom. So, yeah, sorry it was short, but we still have to cut costs. All right, moving on to the F4S in a second. Then to the last jet of the video, the F4S Phantom. This jet was the final and most advanced Navy Phantom version ever. Instead of building a new aircraft, the Navy upgraded the existing four F4Js, and so it was introduced in the late 1970s, and then the upgrade program was initiated in 1977. And why the F4S was created? Because the Navy wanted a stronger Phantom while waiting for the F-14 Tomcats. The F4S improved maneuverability, radar, survivability, and reliability. The maneuverability upgrades was nice, having leading edge slats. The F4J didn't have this, but they brought it back for the F4S. But you could try and dogfight a MiG-29, but that's heavily depending on the MiG's pilot. But at the end of the day, you're a Phantom and can't dogfight shit. The radar is the same radar, having a pulse-Doppler mode, meaning it will ignore the ground clutter for low ground attacks. The regular pulse radar sucked heavily because it was great for hiding spot for aircraft and can't even lock on to the aircraft as well. The F4J has the same radar as well as the F4S, but I just want to get into pulse-Doppler radars so you guys know what's good for them. Survivability and reliability was good and great. Moving to the engines on the F4S, the engines were smokeless engines, meaning it was difficult to spot the aircraft. It got more upgrades like upgraded navigation and targeting equipment. Throughout service history, the F4S served mainly with the U.S. Navy, U.S. Marine Corps. The F4S served mainly with the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Marine Corps, and Cold War operations. It protected carrier battle groups during the late Vietnam era, 1970s Cold War tensions, early 1980 deployments as well. Then later on, the F4S gave way to the other fighters like the F-14 or F-18. The F-18 wouldn't even know about the Phantom, but yeah. The F4S is starting to phase out of service, and the Navy wanted it to be replaced by the F-14 once it's ready. Okay, to wrap things up with the Phantom family, F-4 Phantom became one of the most produced Western supersonic fighters, a symbol of the Vietnam and Cold War eras. A fighter used over by 10 countries, over 5,000 Phantoms were produced, the speed of Mach 2. Sometimes the pilots would nickname it the Rhino, and even decades later, the Phantom remains one of the most recognizable military aircraft ever built.